Welcome back to another DF Retro Extra thing, and today we're going to try our hand at another set of press conferences. And by set I mean we're going to compare what Nintendo and Sony did in the year 2004 when they unveiled both the PSP and the Nintendo DS. And as you can see right here from the beginning already, this is our first look at the PSP. And I think this is a really interesting time, and to discuss this with me today I am joined by Rich Ledbetter.
Hello there, John. So yeah, this is a fascinating time because, well, if we go back to these conferences, this was such a one-sided battle. It was unbelievable. Sony revealed the PSP for the first time. Obviously the spec of the machine was kind of out of this world for a handheld at the time. Then Nintendo rolled up with their kind of lo-fi DS presentation, and it kind of looked like game over before a single game had actually been sold. But as we both know, history took a somewhat different turn.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially what we're getting here with the PSP is, if you look at other handhelds in the market at the time, Sony kind of skipped a generation, right? If we say the Game Boy Advance, which was the current handheld at the time, that's
Right.
basically like Super NES level graphics, right?
Yeah.
And Sony's like, we're just going straight for PlayStation 2 level graphics here. And this is at a time when handhelds really couldn't do anything quite like this. Like, this had dedicated 3D hardware in it. It was clocked at what, 233 megahertz? I mean, this is ridiculous for a small handheld.
Yeah, the spec was unbelievable. I remember at the time I was speaking to a third-party developer. Nothing was really known about the PSP at the time, and he said, "Well, what do you expect from it?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, I expect a PlayStation 1 in mobile form factor, and this kind of leaves PlayStation 2 alone in the kind of high-end space." And he said, "No, it's going to be kind of more PS2 than PS1." Maybe that was a slightly optimistic appraisal of the situation, but still, it would, that machine definitely punched above its weight for the time.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, so obviously, with the form factor right there, the main things to look at, as Kaz is rattling off the specs here, is it's a large color widescreen display of a quality that had not really been seen on not just handhelds, but mobile devices in general. I mean, This was still the era of MP3 players, of some of those not so great video players, of early cell phones with very low quality color screens.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a huge step up just from the design of the system itself. Like, when you first hold it and look at that screen.
Pretty much the only thing that was bigger would be a portable DVD player, but at the time, of course, Sony was attempting to take on that market as well with this device.
So yeah, I think that's this is what makes the PSP time very interesting to me. So this is 2004. The iPhone, smartphone, I mean, there was Blackberries, but the iPhone had not yet hit. That would be years away. And even then it took some time to evolve. But this idea of tying everything into a single machine, you have your music, your movies, your games, TV, internet, that's kind of what companies were racing towards at this stage in the game. And this was like Sony's take on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like at the conference, it may seem a little bit a little silly now in some ways, but it really seemed impressive to be able to have all this on the go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's very pleased about it. The great Kaz himself, extremely proud of this little device here. And I think what's kind of fascinating about this entire intro section here for the PSP is that it is 100% specs, to the point where he's literally describing the Wi-Fi switch on the top. It's kind of weird.
That's the weird thing too, right? This is so different from modern conferences. I mean, they just have the PSP sitting on a little plastic shelf, and he's just rattling off all the details. And some of the things that he says about this are just bizarre. Like, comes with curved surfaces.
It incorporates new technologies like curved surfaces and wireless connectivity.
Yeah, that was kind of like a unique selling point, apparently, curved surfaces.
Indeed.
And yeah, very, very strange sort of presentation, to the point where he literally tells you in millimeters the dimensions of the device, not to mention the weight.
The product dimensions are 170 millimeters long, 74 millimeters high, and 23 millimeters deep. In total, it weighs 260 grams.
And it's
In
kind of
grams,
like, yeah, it's the sort of thing that these days you'd get on a PR press release that would be sent out after the conference. It's kind of incidental detail. But, you know, everything you kind of need to know, at least about the externals of the device, that was, you know, that was basically him reading it out. Nothing much about the specs. I think he talks a little bit about VRAM, but not a huge amount about the main processor or whatnot.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing about this is it's and it's funny to listen to the things that they stress. Like they're very clear about the fact that it has a 16:9 aspect ratio screen. That's pointed out several times
Several times, yeah. It's kind of weird, isn't it? You know, this time, you know, in the current era, that is the standard. If it's not 16:9, you know, it's kind of a little weird and wacky.
And you know, thinking back, I mean, I kind of get it. Like in 2004, that was the year Doom 3 launched, and John Carmack himself originally said, well, we don't need widescreen support in Doom 3 because who uses a widescreen monitor?
Right.
Even though there was pictures of it with a CRT, but you know, it was added later. But the idea was, it's true, at this point in the game, like widescreen displays were uncommon.
Yeah, and the actual presentation of this conference, there's a lot of lingering shots.
Yeah, it's a very slow presentation compared to what they do today.
I haven't seen any bar charts yet. This was kind of a signature element of the Sony press conference of the era. But I am enjoying the set here, the kind of UMD shaped background furniture, the pantomime curtains.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. All those, like, I guess LCD screens with the word PSP on it, the PSP logo. It's just great.
Yeah. Now, is this actually a final representation of the machine?
So, it's close, but in some of the shots you can see, like in the back, there was the little, I guess, plastic holes, I think, are slightly different maybe. I need to pull up my original unit as a reference, but unlike the Nintendo DS, which we'll get to shortly, this actually looks very close to the final unit.
Yeah, I think the one thing that, I don't know, it seems wrong to me, that the unit isn't active. And, when the screen is off, you know, this is the cynic in me, but I just immediately think that it's a hollowed out shell.
We are planning for a wide range of peripherals for PlayStation Portable. Some you may expect, and other non-conventional items. Some of the standard peripheral plans include a stand, remote controller, headphones.
So yeah, at this point then, now he's actually talking about all the accessories and such, where it's like, but some of the weird things they talk about, like there's remote controllers, there's GPS functionalities, there's cameras, and some of the stuff came to pass. Like, wasn't there some sort of, I can't remember if it came out in the US.
There was definitely a GPS device for it, that's for sure.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, the Universal Media Disc. Now, funny one, this one. Now, obviously, with PS2 level games, cartridges kind of wouldn't have cut it, would they? And I think we're still some way short of a time where you could sell memory cards at a reasonable price.
Yeah, so flash memory, I think, was completely off the table at this time. Like, I don't remember what size it shipped with. Like the PSP, it might have been like a 64 megabyte card, possibly smaller.
I think it might have been less than that. I think
32 megabytes?
Yeah, it might have even been 8.
Either way, you were spending like upwards of $100, $200 for like a 1 gigabyte Memory Stick Pro or Memory Stick Duo Pro to insert into your PSP. And so obviously UMD, I think a double layered UMD is 1.8 gigs or around there, I believe.
I think it was something like 1.5. It was quite low, that was for sure.
Well, you know, for the time, that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's smaller than DVD, but it's larger than CD. It's comparable to the GameCube.
Plenty for a small form factor machine, I'd have thought, for a mobile machine.
Yeah, so the UMD format then is interesting in that sense, because on one hand it does offer that extra storage space, but on the other hand it introduced the problem of loading times, and the PSP was somewhat notorious for that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that UMD just wasn't fast enough. They actually introduced caching, doubled the internal memory, used it as a cache on the second generation PSP.
Yeah, exactly.
Continues the proud tradition of the second gen consoles from Sony being the best models in my opinion. But,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And smart developers got around this. I mean, Ridge Racer, perfectly fine loading. It's fast, but there's some games where you're waiting like 30 to 60 seconds at best, and on a handheld system, that's not a huge. I mean, that's a real problem.
well, the real problem I think is that when the PSP was hacked and all the games were running from the memory stick, it was a preferable solution to the one that you actually had bundled with the machine. The UMD just was so slow.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But another side of the UMD that seems quaint by today's standards, and maybe even at the time, was the fact that they tried to sell it as a format for films.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of weird, wasn't it? Because now, if you watch a UMD movie on the PSP screen, now the resolution there was 480 by 272, if memory serves.
Yeah.
That's, those discs were mastered at 720 by 480.
That's right.
So, it was obviously downsampled, it looked pretty good. Now, they wanted to roll this out as a full kind of competitor almost to the DVD, which kind of, well, when the PSP 2000 came out with the video output, which gave you the full resolution of UMD,
Right.
only then did you see just how kind of suboptimal the movie format was.
Yeah, it was some sort of, I think, H.264 AVC codec or something,
Right, it would
with
be
an ATtrack 3 stereo audio track.
Stereo, how they had the gall to launch this as a kind of, movie format with only stereo sound. That's just not.
I mean,
really
I guess
good
they're
enough.
just assuming you're only looking at headphones. And oh, here we go. So this is our kind of a first look at PSP games here.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
as I've understood over time, is that as of this conference, a lot of this development hardware simply wasn't ready, and not a lot of developers had access to it. So some things do actually look rather comparable, like, well, even Ape Escape there, which is kind of an up-res style game, but some of this stuff is just like apparently run on PS2 class hardware. Like,
Right.
developers put together tech demos based on the specs and what they thought it might look like. And so it's kind of mixed, but at the same time, you see some of these games and they actually do really look like the final PSP titles.
So we were kind of 6 months out from release at this point.
That's, yeah, around there, yeah. So this is E3 of 2004, and the system would launch in December 2004 in Japan.
Yeah, I remember paying a fortune for a Japanese import because Ridge Racer was unmissable. It was just an incredible game.
Oh yeah, that was the one. And, oh look, Gran Turismo 4 completely
It continues
inaccurate.
a proud tradition of Polyphony Digital just giving us CG trailers for everything they do.
Aha, there's Coated Arms. This Ridge Racer concept footage, which just looks like it's from the older games. Tony Hawk on there. I mean, when you look at the names on here, like bringing a 2D fighter like bringing a 2D fighter like Darkstalkers to a portable was pretty cool, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that looked great.
I mean, there was, I look back on the PSP very fondly. I had one myself, and I didn't really have a DS at all. And, I did a lot of traveling at the time, and this was my go-to machine. I'd be watching TV episodes on it. I'd be doing all manner of things with it. It was just kind of like, I think it's something you said earlier, it is kind of like the prototype all-in-one mobile device that these days we just take for granted. Everything is built into the phone, which ultimately, quite possibly, was a key sort of reason why Sony just don't bother with mobile devices anymore.
Yeah, and then, oh, this is great here. To talk about more third-party games, we have Don Matrick.
Yeah, the man who is often credited for tanking the Xbox One launch.
So
the conspiracy theories can start here with that Kaz Don handshake.
it's quite something. So yeah, he was working in Electronic Arts still here, and yeah, the Don Matrick years at Microsoft were certainly fascinating, to say the least.
That's something we'll return to another time, I think.
Yes, I think we'll revisit that topic, but that's behind us now. But here we go. So essentially, I guess, EA had been committed to the PlayStation brand pretty heavily at this point still. I mean, the PS2 was huge for them.
Yeah.
And, they went in on the PSP as well with several different games around launch time, including I want to say a conversion, but it's more like a new game of Need for Speed Underground.
Right, okay.
Which is, it's a pretty poor conversion, I think. It looks okay, but it's a very different game. And they also did some sports titles and all that, but...
Well, he's talking here about putting the same level of commitment into PSP that they put into PS2, which is clearly a Pinocchio moment, really. I mean, they did have a decent range. They did have a decent range of games, but there was nothing like the same level of commitment. And well, in terms of the games that came out, I mean, I guess we're going to see a short montage in a minute of their launch offerings. And again, something kind of weird going on here.
Yeah, there's an NBA Street, NFL Street, Tiger Woods, of course.
And Need for Speed Underground.
So, and it's kind of, you look at what's happening today with the Switch, and because it's kind of it's a console as well, it's powerful enough, developers are kind of making the same game and simply downgrading them to work on the Switch, whereas here on the PSP, you really had to make a bespoke version, specifically tailored for the hardware, and I think that's, they were promising console-style games, which meant the development budgets and production quality would have to increase, but they couldn't just bring their console games directly to the PSP. So I think that kind of creates a slightly challenging spot. And if the PSP had been as successful, I mean, it was very successful, but if it had been like DS level successful, I think maybe more developers would have been,
So here's the showreel that we're talking about, and obviously, I mean, to be fair, he does say that it's not PSP footage for the most part. He says that it's based on the specs that Sony have given them, which is a massive get-out clause there. And, all of this stuff is clearly sort of PS2 60 hertz.
Exactly. It's running at a smooth 60 frames per second, which, not to say PSP doesn't have 60 FPS games, but now the Need for Speed stuff, that actually looks kind of like very much in progress development shots from that version of the game.
Yeah, it looks totally different to the other ones, and this is the advantage we have here of having a 60 hertz feed of the original conference.
Exactly.
You can see the night and day difference between the sports titles and Need for Speed here, and probably Need for Speed is the only one that's kind of not faked, as it were.
Yeah.
Man, EA Sports big.
That.
That's a brand that we all miss, right?
Yeah, I've seen the excitement for SSX3 recently when it was re-announced, so as backwards compatible.
Yeah, I think we'd all, love to see the return of SSX.
Yes, done properly this time.
So there we go.
There goes Don Matrick, off to join Xbox. That's the handshake that sealed the deal.
Yeah, so the PSP, I mean, funny you should mention a development kit, because for the entire 3-year duration of Digital Foundry, I've had a PSP development kit sitting right behind me on the set there.
Yeah, I'm not sure you could see it on... Can you see it on the video? I have to look again.
You can see it, yeah. It's definitely been there for the whole duration. Maybe we should get some shots of this to put into this video.
Slide them in right here. But yeah, if you look behind Rich during any of those presentations, you're going to see a white tower with a nice square UMD drive on top.
Yeah, UMD drive, and it had a DVD drive on it as well. You could actually master your games onto DVD, play them from there. And what you can't see is that there's kind of like a wired head, which just had a PSP case on it. And this is a fascinating device. We actually used this just for playing debug games back in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, it looks like Kaz is talking about UMD video and audio, which we touched on before.
You see, to be fair, they did indeed get wide support from major entertainment partners. It's just they didn't get wide support from the public. So the discs were just sitting in HMV for the most part, doing nothing. But there were some big titles on there, not just Sony ones. I remember the Matrix and whatnot.
There was a lot of like music videos as well and television shows. Now this is the most Sony 2004, 2005 era thing they could ever do.
It sort of begins their bizarre obsession with SpiderMan 2, really, doesn't it?
This is where it starts. So, I mean, I think this sequence kind of really highlights just how much they wanted to push video. Like, you can do video on a mobile device. Like, check this out. We're just gonna stick this camera in front of a PSP, playing a SpiderMan trailer for the whole trailer.
And it is actually, it's only the video stuff that we actually get to see running on the device.
Yeah,
assuming it is running on the device, I think it is. It's not, you know, I don't see any signs of the composite that would be required there.
yeah, it looks like you can see the smear and glare a little bit on the screen, and there's no reason why they should have to fake this at this point, honestly.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't they give away Spider-Man 2 UMDs?
You are absolutely correct.
Yeah,
they
'cause
did
I had
indeed.
one. In fact, I think I had two, one for each of the units that I got.
The most watched UMD movie,
Wow.
probably.
Well, almost certainly, because it was free.
It's the only one anybody ever had.
But yeah, this is fascinating because, you know, it is curious to see that only years later did we see that the quality wasn't really up to it.
Yeah, that's the thing for sure. It's and you know, part of that just comes down to storage space, right? If you're at a max of say 1.8 gigabytes on a UMD versus a double layer DVD is
dual
like
layer.
what, 9 or 8 point.
Yeah, 8.5 getting on for 9 gigabytes, you're right, yeah. So, you know, it's just a sheer data compression issue, really.
And of course, I mean, DVD used MPEG 2, which is notoriously fairly large, right?
Yeah.
But the codec here and everything, it just doesn't hold up. The macro blocking's pretty severe.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, the thing about the PSP, the thing that I loved about it was you showed it to your friends and they were blown away by it.
Yeah, it's true. It kind of felt like the future at the time, and that's something. It's really hard to communicate. If you weren't there, it's hard to really communicate what this felt like, because just this idea of a screen looking that good in this beautiful device with games like Ridge Racer on there at 60 frames per second. I mean, this is a game that had stuff like specular highlights on the road. You know, like pseudo pixel shader like functions, like super high frame rates, like reflections on the cars. It's ridiculous how impressive it looked, and that's a game I need to cover in an episode of DF Retro sometime, I think, because
and then you swap out the UMD to Spider-Man 2. Your friends are blown away. I think, you know, this is the machine that did everything.
And I can put my MP3s on it.
Yeah. And I can put my own really poorly encoded videos on there. They actually had a restriction on the kind of self-encoded video you could play back on it.
That's right.
Yeah, it didn't look that great.
I believe if you open up copies of Handbrake today, there's still, on the preset side, they still have PSP presets over there that persist to this day, just in case.
So where's Kaz going now? It's kind of curious dual mic setup that he's got going on there.
Yeah, what's up with that? It's I like his billowing shirt there as well. It's just, you know, oh wait, okay, what does he got here for us? Oh, yes.
We're still in UMD land, aren't we? So
it's Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. So even all the way back like 14 years ago, there was still an obsession with the Final Fantasy VII nostalgia.
Yeah.
This was the first, I think, stab at it that had been done. Like, all right, we're bringing Advent Children. And then there was Crisis Core that would be announced for PSP eventually, and some other mobile games.
Yeah.
You know,
was that a PSP exclusive, Crisis Core?
It was, and in fact, I believe Crisis Core is one of the games that was only ever released on UMD. You can't get it digitally on their shop. When they finally did introduce a digital shop,
Right.
It's never been ported. It's a PSP game, so if you're not emulating, which, you know, that's one way, you can only really play it on the PSP.
So it's kind of curious to compare pre-rendered CG from all those years ago to real-time Final Fantasy 15 in the here and now.
Yeah, I mean, we're a little bit limited by the DVD quality here, but you can kind of, I mean, obviously there's some aspects of rendering at the time, the offline rendering, that is still superior, but the way the look of the characters, I feel like, is actually superior in Final Fantasy 15. Like, this was before realistic skin shading was common in a lot of these Japanese style games. Like, you look at Square's PS2 era output, you look at you know, the bouncer and everything like that, and even other games like Dead or Alive series.
Yeah.
They always had an almost doll-like complexion.
Yeah, it's like the Terminators with plastic skin before they were replaced by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Exactly. So
yeah, it's very sort of
fascinating.
flat look on it. Obviously, there's stuff here that you still couldn't do in real time today.
Of
but
course.
Character rendering, it's kind of very much of its age here. So, Advent Children. Now, I remember this as, again, it was a UMD movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a DVD, there's a Blu-ray, but yeah, I think it was a big UMD release. I never had it, but the movie itself is not especially great from my recollection. It's kind of a series of fan service sea battles, but you know, it was a big thing at the time.
Yeah, I think anything Final Fantasy VII related was just a big deal. It's something you'd love to roll out at an E3 conference.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look how pleased he looks with that. He's like, we just blew them away.
Well, I'll be honest with you, if I produced the PSP, I'd be pretty pleased with myself as well.
There's no doubt about it. It's funny though, we didn't touch on it yet, but he did briefly mention battery life earlier in the least committal way possible. Like,
well, the thing is, again, I think there is, let's be generous and call it smoke and mirrors. The numbers I was hearing were like 10 hours. Those were the numbers that were coming out, and it wasn't for gaming, for sure.
It's like listening to music.
Listening to I mean, the screen's off, I guess, on that particular one. But you got no real idea. I mean, it was about 3 hours, really, wasn't it? 3 to 5 hours?
Yeah, and it was like 3 to 5, which wasn't bad. And if you're watching Incubus music videos, then it's more like, you know, maybe just like 2, because no, it's really...
Probably feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like 100 hours.
A lifetime of battery life watching Incubus videos. Yeah, this is kind of weird. I'm assuming they're a Sony artist group.
Has to be.
And, you know... I particularly like the way he gives a name-checked thanks to Incubus as one of the people who did one of the demos for the PSP. I mean, that's kind of
Thanks
random.
to all you hardworking developers, and of course, thank you to Incubus.
Thank you to the mega stars
for making this possible. We wouldn't be here without Incubus.
Please allow me to extend a special word of thanks to Sony Pictures Entertainment, Square Enix, Sony Music Entertainment, and Incubus for those great demonstrations. The PlayStation Portable release schedule breaks out as follows.
I think what's curious is that they...
they're announcing the release schedule next.
Right, of course,
yes. Yeah. And it's true. So yeah, it was indeed December 2004 in Japan, and man, I really wanted one of those on import, but you know, the cost and...
It was massively... I did buy one, and... it was massively expensive to get one, but man, it was worth it at the time for Ridge Racer. It really was an awesome game. There was just nothing like it. That little analog nub had a very rough sort of feel to it, and I can still feel the way it sort of indented into my thumb. So yes. This is curious because it's not related at all to the PlayStation Portable. Interesting, they never really referred to it as the PSP. It was always PlayStation Portable.
That's right.
Now he would turn up a year later in the infamous
2005 conference,
PS3 reveal, which we've already covered. And what's curious about this is that essentially it's like, hey, we're working on a next-gen system. You know, PS2 owners, you're on notice.
At this point, I suppose the cell processor had already been known somewhat.
Right.
Like, at least like, hey, we're working on something, and here they come out to sort of talk about a little bit more about what this thing is going to offer. And it's kind of fascinating, and it's not something you would really see today, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, if we're going to assume that PS5 is earliest holiday 2019, more realistically perhaps 2020, you know, this is kind of like an announcement of hardware that would be, you know, kind of unprecedented by today's standards for being so early.
Yeah, we would already know about what's going on in the box.
We'd already know about the main processor because, you know, this guy would be up on stage at E3 telling us about it. This just doesn't happen anymore.
No.
And it's interesting, we'll come onto it shortly, but they did something similar on the Nintendo show as well. They revealed the existence of the machine that would become the Wii.
Exactly.
Which is kind of curious. There's a kind of definite divergence in the approach that Sony and Nintendo would take.
That's true. And there's also this, it's very bizarre that they're out there talking about cell-based workstations. Like as if this is somehow relevant to...
It's like we don't want to say the words PlayStation 3, but hey, here's what else we're doing with the main processor.
Yeah.
So who's this guy?
He's an IBM guy, I guess, working on the workstation side of things.
I'm surprised they didn't sort of have Incubus in the audience.
Oh, stand up and wave.
Yeah, stand
Say
up.
hello to Incubus.
Take a bow.
Take a bow.
So he's basically just telling us that there's a collaboration and there's going to be workstations based on the cell. It's kind of random, and here's what they were going to be doing.
Showing like, so there's Gran Turismo 4 in the corner, some CGI over there on the left.
Yeah.
And then
some polygons. Just
polygons.
Random shapes in the bottom right. Kind of weird.
And then it's like, okay, everything leads to supercomputing.
So did this cell actually end up doing any supercomputing?
I feel like it did end up in some IBM Blade servers at some point, maybe.
Right.
I'm not sure what it was used for. Like how much. Like that's something we need to look into because it's a very strange concept.
I mean, what I do know is that a big bunch of networked PlayStation 3s ended up hosting a supercomputer in the brilliant TV show Person of Interest.
Oh.
That was done years after the PS3 had kind of ceased being a thing, which was a fascinating kind of throwback to Sony's intentions for the PlayStation 3 hardware here.
It's kind of a weird thing about these Sony consoles from this period as well. Like, remember the PS2 was everybody was concerned about launching missiles.
Oh yeah, of course.
That?
Yeah, Saddam Hussein was going to
he's
threaten the world with a big bunch of networked. I think I'm not going to be pointing the finger at Sony here, but it certainly didn't do. In terms of marketing, it certainly sort of made you think of it in a completely different light than you would otherwise. The Cell was a really good CPU, but it's not going to be used for missile guidance systems or anything like that.
No, but instead they're still talking up this stuff like supercomputing, like the very heady stuff that would completely kind of disappear when they got to the PlayStation 4 era.
Right.
Like once they switched gears to that, it's like, I guess this team was very focused on the big picture in a way. And, Mark Cerny and crew were very much like, okay, we're focused on games and that's it. And they're kind of right.
Well, here's the thing, what we're going to be seeing from Nintendo is a flat-out rejection of the technological arms race.
That's right.
And some might say that Sony's pursuit of the state-of-the-art in technology kind of came back to bite them in the ass, you might say.
Yeah, and I think, with that in mind, maybe we should take a look at Nintendo now.
Okay.
So this is pretty much the end of the conference here. Just finished up here with this little bit of Cell, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I feel like we have, thus far, we've seen the PSP. Sony's kind of given us a glimpse of what they envisioned with the system, and that's kind of what came to pass, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't as successful as they hoped, but it was still a success.
It was massive in Japan, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it still sold a lot of units. It was a success overall, but the Nintendo DS...
Yeah, if we talk about things relatively, the DS just, massively outsold it.
My name is Reggie. I'm about kicking ass. I'm about taking names. And we're about making games.
So yes, we are on to Nintendo. And let's put things into perspective here. So this is 2004. The GameCube was admittedly not much of a success. It's a great system, but it didn't do very well. The Game Boy Advance was pretty successful though, but...
Yeah, it was a really nice little machine, but it was kind of like a portable Super Nintendo, I guess.
Yeah, and looking back, that's actually a very positive aspect of it, because that's the last bastion of the more traditional, sprite-based games that were done in that way. I mean, today there's still plenty of 2D games, but they're handled somewhat differently in terms of how the hardware deals with them. But so Nintendo comes in with this epic introduction. They've got some big games on the way. There's Resident Evil 4. There was Metroid Prime 2. Killer 7 from Suda. I mean, this is, even though the GameCube wasn't a huge success, there was some awesome stuff on there, and same with the Game Boy Advance. But I feel like 2004 is right when Nintendo they wanted to come out and sort of change their image. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they as we said earlier, they ceded the technological high ground. The focus changed.
Yep.
And we'll hear it, direct from Reggie's mouth here a bit later on.
That's an important thing to note, by the way. You uttered the magic word, which is, of course, Reggie. This is the famous conference where Reggie appeared for the very first time.
Yeah, and it's quite a remarkable introduction. He's almost like declaring war on us.
Yeah, he comes out with the quote, and they cut right to the next footage of, well, Metroid Prime 2, which looks great. And the conference kind of runs out in this way where it's like, all right, we're cutting between games in a way that's very different from what we just saw with Sony, right? Like, we missed the initial part of the PlayStation 2 conference for a reason, because it was a lot of charts and graphs and CAS coming out there, waxing poetic about how successful they've been. And Nintendo, instead, they're kind of coming out strong with just, here's games.
Yeah. And, well, you know, Metroid Prime 2 is a great way to kick off, really.
Sure is, yeah, absolutely.
So let's sort of return to the matter at hand. And
Yes, so we're gonna jump ahead a little bit here. So this is the moment.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I love handheld reveals. They're always in the pocket.
That's right.
Or out in the pocket. And
Look at that.
yeah, it looks almost, but not quite, entirely unlike a DS.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of differences. There's the black border around the screen, there's the indents in the top screen, the lack of speakers, the way the buttons are raised up compared to the final unit. I mean, it's clearly it's a prototype, which is kind of interesting because the PSP looked rather final despite releasing somewhat later, just a little bit. But the DS was out, I guess, the end of 2004 in most, if not all, regions.
Right, okay, well that's interesting because, well, to put it simply, it takes a long time to manufacture a games console, you know, months in advance.
Exactly.
So the fact that they don't have final ID on the hardware, I find quite interesting.
Exactly.
So they must have still been working on it. It must have kind of gone much closer to the wire than the PSP.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Reggie's pretty much, you kind of, this is interesting. This is the turning point for Nintendo when they went from pushing the technological envelope to focusing on a different approach. So, you know, the Super NES, the GameCube, the Nintendo 64 were, admittedly, they were cutting edge, extremely well made consoles for the time. They were competing with the best of the best. I mean, the GameCube, I put on par, mostly on par with the original Xbox in a lot of ways. It's a very, very powerful machine. But starting with the DS, Nintendo kind of rejected that notion. And even then, it's more so with their next system, the Wii, where it really went. Because this is almost a logical continuation. Because you're going from Super NES to, like, on the Game Boy Advance to more 3D with DS. But the DS doesn't have dedicated 3D hardware in the same way we think of today, right? It's ARM CPUs in there, and it's,
so you lose a lot of effects that we take for granted, even on that sort of generation of hardware, like texture filtering, for example. Which, well, you know, the N64 had that, right?
It sure did. But you know, the DS has some performance advantages due to the way it's designed, and there's a surprisingly high number of 60 frames per second games on the DS.
Well, sure.
It's a nice little machine.
Sorry, I've got to say, John, this background is shocking.
Oh, look at that, the mask around.
That horrible mask around the talking heads there. It's an affront. And the kind of spinning DS, they've just got...
Look at this.
What on earth is going... The funny thing is, of course, is that they're talking about how great the technology is when I think it's Yuji Naka later on who kind of puts his finger on it, literally, by saying that the touch thing is the key innovation here.
And that's an interesting point here. So Sony on the smartphone side of things was pretty much going for the multimedia functions, right? That we expect on a cell phone today. But what they don't have in the PSP is touch. Nintendo, however, they only focused on the touch for the most part. And that's what the system is built on, and it's the input method that would go on to define, you know, mobile hardware going forward, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, this is a resistive touchscreen, not a capacitive one, but this is where a lot of concepts that we would see in mobile games and just some of the modern stuff going forward, and it started here.
It's kind of interesting to see that a lot of the concepts in both of the handheld machines actually now are staples in the smartphone today.
Exactly.
So yeah, you've got the touch here, you've got the 3D acceleration of the PSP, and all of the gadgets that it kind of had as bolt-ons at the time. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see, you know, these guys are both on the right lines, but in entirely different ways here. So this was Reggie's first E3 briefing, right?
That's right.
Because, you know, I'm kind of a bit scared. He's always got a really sort of intimidating presence. A bit later on, those eyes, look, there they are. Wow.
Yeah, he's very intimidating here. He's a very tall man, and those eyes could pierce right through you.
But he does literally address the competition here, which is in a way which...
it's pretty bold at the time.
Directly. I mean, I don't think we saw anything like it until the used game situation in the PS4.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing that I think a lot of people liked about Reggie when he first appeared, was he seemed to be that level of intensity and directness that Nintendo had been lacking and that the fans wanted. They wanted to see Nintendo come out and just take on the competition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that was the first glance at 3D graphics on the DS, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Super Mario 64, as they called it, 64x4, because of the multiplayer aspect. But so yeah, Super Mario 64 on the DS is a strange one because there's some improvements to the visual complexity, but the textures are all remade. They're very different looking, and of course you lose texture filtering. And they just changed some of the visual aspects of the game, so it looks very different. And this is, of course, the crowd kind of cheers when they see Metroid Prime Hunters here, because it's not yet evident what this is going to be. And that's not to say that Prime Hunters is a bad game, but it is definitely not Metroid Prime. It is it's an arena combat game, basically.
Yeah, so there's plenty of whooping in this conference, lots of screaming and shouting, excitement. And it's funny that there wasn't any that we could hear anyway in the Sony conference, you know.
It was very quiet, wasn't it?
Yeah, kind of subdued. And he's kind of whipping them up into a frenzy here, or something like that.
Yeah.
But these are the only two titles that we actually see in the conference. The only two games, Metroid.
That's right.
On the DS, of course. Obviously, we see a ton more on the GameCube and whatnot. But yeah, I mean,
and maybe we can cut in real quick here. Actually, here's some footage of you know, it's like early New Super Mario Brothers running on the DS, which looks completely different than the final game. There's this weird Sonic demo where you're just rubbing the screen violently to go faster, and it just goes around and around in a circle.
Did that ever come out? Because
no, nothing quite like that.
That looks hideous. That looks really
it's awful looking thing. And you know, and then of course there's the Mario 64 stuff. So this kind of gives us an early idea of what the DS looks like. But okay, if we jump back to the conference, then there's the two media bays thing, which is kind of interesting because they had done backwards compatibility on handhelds in the past, right?
Sure.
So the Color and the Game Boy Advance were both... Game Boy Advance, I think, you can play black and white Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and Game Boy Advance games. And here, you could do Game Boy Advance. I need to check if the original DS unit... The later ones definitely do not allow original black and white Game Boy.
Right, okay.
But I haven't checked. I'm a little unfamiliar with whether that was supported on the very first model of the DS.
But I think it's quite interesting that Sony tried to get a showcase of games together.
And
Nintendo didn't, but they did actually have some titles there. But again, I think the takeaway here is that it was very early days for software development on both systems.
There's another interesting thing, a built-in microphone. A strange little addition, but they used it in weird ways from what I recall. Like some games would have you blow into the microphone to trigger certain actions. Or,
okay.
They were really playing around with input, which is something that would come back the following year with the reveal of the Wii.
So wireless capability, now this is awesome, isn't it? This is, I mean, obviously the PSP had it as well, but it was a big deal at the time.
That's right, especially the way Reggie puts it when he says specifically, this is not online, this is no line.
It's beyond online, it's no line.
Yeah, I would love to see, a platform holder try that line today. Maybe if they've got some brand new Wi-Fi technology, it's not online, no line.
I mean, with the way the Switch's infrastructure's gone thus far, you might still be able to use it.
Yeah, but it is interesting to see that they are, really sort of pushing the kind of peer-to-peer networking. Both of the systems did this.
And again, if for the folks watching that haven't really experienced this era, previously, if you wanted to play multiplayer on a handheld, it was a physical cable.
Yeah, but to be fair, Nintendo, right back to the original Game Boy, they had that link cable.
That's true. Yeah, it shipped with the Game Boy. The link cable shipped with the full Tetris pack of the Game Boy, I believe.
Yeah, I had that. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was very cool.
But this is, the the sort of wireless equivalent to it.
And they also introduced PictoChat along with this,
right?
Which they were so pleased with, sending drawings back and forth. That's actually the thing that ended up in the infamous photo. That was floating around where you have like people playing Ridge Racer on PSP and there's a DS sitting there with a sad face on it, like, drawn using PictoChat.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got to say I was Team PSP. I had a PSP and I was blown away by it.
Yeah, for me, I definitely, admittedly, I started off on the PSP and I love the PSP still. I think it's a great system, but once Castlevania was released on the DS, I picked one up, and from there, obviously, yeah, I really appreciate the DS as well. It's a great machine. Now, it does admittedly have a lot of, games like Nintendogs don't really appeal to me, and there's some of the mini game style things aren't really my thing, but there's a lot of really good games on there. There's RPGs, there's platformers, pixel art games, and some other titles. It's a good machine.
I do wonder whether the cost of development would have been a lot lower for a DS title than a PSP title.
I think that's probably exactly the case, because the PSP was starting to scrape up against, more modern PS2 style visuals, which naturally requires a greater investment, and you couldn't just pull over your PS2 or later PS3 game onto the PSP, right? You needed a bespoke version. Yeah. Which of course ate into more resources, but with Nintendo DS, you could get away with some pretty lo-fi stuff. And oh yeah, there's Keiji Inafune prior to his wonderful Mighty No. 9 project.
He's kind of talking about almost using the Wi-Fi for networking tons of...
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure whether that point was ever
He was very excited
explored.
about, think about how many screens you can have when they're all networked together.
Yeah,
okay.
I have trouble keeping track of more than one, I'll be honest with you. Yeah.
Let's be honest. A lot of people used to disparage the DS by saying, hey, it's just a map screen. But in reality, in the games that used that, like having a map screen that was instantly readable without having to press a button and go to a subscreen was actually a really nice feature.
Yeah, I guess it's just, I didn't really play DS so much, but when I see footage like that, it kind of just looks a bit weird that so much real estate is given over to a map screen.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit strange.
Well, so there were the Sonic Rush games in there, which were interesting, and Contra 4 as well, where they draw the game world across both screens.
Right,
so it was a very vertical aspect. And, they have the bezel in the middle there, but so the game would logically be designed without it taken into account. So you would never find your character in the middle, but you could transition between the two screens at any time.
I've got to say, whoever directed this shot deserves a medal. This is epic stuff.
That's a great shot.
Statesman-like,
right there. Look at that. I love that.
I think, you're right. Reggie was the kind of catalyst that Nintendo needed at that point.
Yeah, with them falling behind in the market, it's like Nintendo fans needed something to hold on to, and he did a great job here in this presentation. I think it really helped sort of spur the next generation of Nintendo to push on. And of course, Iwata himself was there, a great man. He did a lot of great stuff for the industry, and this was not too long after he took over as president of Nintendo.
So why is he here? Because he's not talking so much about the DS, although he does do the pocket trick.
So yeah, you see here he's kind of talking a little bit about, he's reminiscing about their older consoles. And of course he mentions the DS, but Iwata is here to kind of tease their next generation platform.
Right.
And he has a very light way of basically saying that, he's basically trying to tell the audience that we're not focusing on advanced hardware. And he's directly saying this, like, we're not going after high-end next generation graphics here.
But that is exactly the point that Reggie made earlier. He said, the other guys are telling you about the horsepower, and what was he saying? Something about we're all about the experience when you're in the car.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
Exactly.
And that kind of extends, obviously, to the system that he is discussing here, which...
Well, he's showing the DS here, but, you know, it's all... He's alluding...
He name checks the Revolution, which
Exactly.
is the pre-production code name for the machine that we would call the Wii.
And it's an interesting time because I don't think anybody really saw this coming, because the DS, again, could be sort of a natural evolution from Game Boy Advance, but at this point, I don't think anybody could have predicted that Nintendo would essentially stick with lower spec system and just focus on a very different style of input with a very different style of game.
Well, you know, they focused on input for the DS and they kind of doubled down with it on the Revolution, on
That's
the Wii.
right.
And I kind of, it's almost audacious in a way, because the GameCube, by Nintendo standards, is a failure. And yet they're essentially using the exact same technology as the hardware foundation for their next system that wouldn't come out for another 2 years.
It's quite something. They, I mean, I think the hardware itself, for when it was engineered, is extremely high quality. But it's interesting that they thumbed their noses at HD TVs in this way, because the real issue at the Wii, for me, technologically speaking, was that it doesn't look good on a flat panel screen. Like the way the video output works, the fact that the games are designed for anamorphic widescreen, so you're stretching things out, they just look blurry, fuzzy. It's bad image quality. But if you put a Wii on a really nice quality CRT, it looks gorgeous.
I'm sure it would, because fundamentally that video processing technology was designed in the CRT era.
And that's the thing, right? It feels like I would be interested to know what their discussions were like regarding future TV technology. Did they really just not believe that HD would not be a thing for a longer period of time, or did they just say, we really don't care?
It simply could be where the focus of R&D was at that time, where it was all on the controller, which, to be fair, was a masterpiece, really.
Yeah, I'm not going to deny it. I mean, you look at what they did with Wii Sports and the effect that had, and even for me, like the first time you swing that tennis racket and you feel that rumble in the controller, it was really impressive. There's no doubt about it.
And, you know, again, controller inputs, you know, they were doing some crazy stuff like the Wii Fit board. Huge success. You couldn't buy that for so long. And the same with the Wii itself, you know, it was a massive success.
Right.
And it was nothing, you know, they were totally divorced from the technological arms race at that point. But it was a simple concept that was, you know, accessible, easy to understand, and felt great in, you know, when it was used properly.
That's right.
So, and it's kind of ironic that they kind of lost that magic with the Wii U.
Yeah. Whereas with the Switch is interesting because, you know, it is not as strong as the other home consoles, but because it's a handheld, it's actually very impressive. Like what they're doing as a handheld is impressive again. So it feels like the Switch kind of, I wouldn't say it abandoned this philosophy, but it sort of changed it in a way.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this is this is, I believe this is the first time they had shown off what would become The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And you have to keep in mind, again, around this time, this was post Wind Waker. I mean, when Wind Waker was first revealed, people were very angry about the cartoonish look. A lot of people. I think it looks great. And I think most people have come to really appreciate Toon Link in the style of that. But this was Nintendo leaning into what people wanted, a more serious, mature looking Zelda perhaps. Even though what you're seeing here isn't really representative of the final visuals.
Yeah, it's curious, this one, because it does look like it's running in real time on something.
I'm sure it was. It's just,
they just
clearly
changed it radically.
This looks very early. Yeah, and no subtitle yet.
Yeah, it wasn't called Twilight Princess at that point.
Oh, there we go.
I like the way they tried to do a fade between Link and it kind of semi-worked there, I think.
Oh man, the crowd, I mean, they really know how to feed the crowd.
Yeah.
And this is probably, this is the E3 that brought back that excitement, I think, for Nintendo in a way.
I like the way they're kind of trying to synchronize the swooshing of the sword with his movements here.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So he's basically giving us a very basic outline of the game that would become Twilight Princess at this point.
Yeah, so this is early 2000. Yeah, so it would be more than 2.5 years after this announcement where we would finally see the game.
Fascinating
Which
stuff.
isn't that, it's not that strange anymore. Like when God of War was announced, what, 2016?
Mm-hmm. Something like that, maybe
2 years
even
ago.
earlier.
I mean, big games these days take time.
So that's it really, isn't it? That's the end of the two conferences, the key parts. And yeah, I think, again, the sort of takeaway from my perspective was lack of games that they showed on the DS. We saw 2 titles and we were kind of thinking, was there actually anything else to show at all? But there is B-roll that exists of those other titles you mentioned.
Yeah, and
so there was stuff going on.
There was stuff going on. It was being shown. But I think, I mean, hopefully this kind of gives you a better idea of why the DS seemed like it was in such a dire place before it launched, because this presentation of the DS is not good enough in terms of showing what the system can do. And when it did eventually launch, the launch titles weren't great. I mean, they had things like the thumb strap, where you're supposed to like glide a little plastic disc around on the analog or on the touchscreen like an analog stick. They quickly got rid of that. That didn't work great, but
they went pretty low on the price point, which is something you don't see with
that's true.
With
they
Nintendo
went very low. It was $149,
days.
I believe, in the US.
And the PSP was what?
$249. Which again, that's actually pretty impressive considering what they were promising there, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I bought 2 PSPs. I had the Japanese model, which I got as an import and paid an absolute fortune for. And then I think E3 2005, I got a US PSP.
Whatever happened to those? You sell them?
I've still got the Japanese one, I believe, and my son had the US one.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah.
For myself, being the collector I am, I do have every iteration of both the PSP and the DS. Of them all, my favorite PSP has to be the PSP 3000, because though some folks complain about the pseudo interlace look, it has the fastest screen in terms of up refresh rate.
Right.
Has the best black levels and best colors.
Any game that ran at 60 hertz on that screen, I couldn't stand it. Like GT just didn't really look good to me. It was, you could see the image breaking up.
It's a weird thing. It's an acquired taste, but I like the way that looked. But then of course on the DS side, it's the DSi XL.
Right.
That thing is gorgeous with the champagne colors, I believe, or no, I have the burgundy one. That's what it is. It's the burgundy DSi XL. It's a beautiful machine, great screens, perfect for playing 2D pixel art games. But looking back, I actually still find myself pulling out both the DS and the PSP. I think they're great machines, and they were both successful. So yeah, even though the DS went on to sort of blow past the PSP in terms of the overall market share, they were both a success, and PSP is what helped Monster Hunter become the big name that it is today, right?
Right. I think the bottom line is that if PSP wasn't successful, we wouldn't have had a Vita.
That's right.
And we did. So it was.
It was enough. It was successful enough that they thought they could try it again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Vita, well, it's a story for another day.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that's going to do it for today's discussion. Hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to us discuss these 2 handhelds, because we don't often get to talk about dedicated handhelds on the channel, so this was kind of fun to revisit. If you enjoyed this though, we will continue to cover other old conferences and maybe other events in this way, because I have to admit it's a lot of fun to look back at this stuff.
Definitely, yeah. Wow, this has been an education, a re-education.
Yeah, for sure. And for those wondering, we will definitely be getting to the wonderful 2005 Xbox 360 reveal at some point in the future. But for now, I think that's going to do it for this video, so thanks for joining me, Rich.
No problem at all.
But alright, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter as always, and until next time, stay retro.
Go! Ridge Racer! Whoa, it's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer! It's 1995, alright!
If you made it this far in the video, thanks for sticking with us. I thought it would be fun to include a little bonus feature at the end here. Basically, the DVD from which I pulled this conference from included a nice interview with the late Satoru Iwata. Now, this was just after he took over as president of Nintendo and before all the stuff with the DS and Wii really took off, so it's kind of fun to listen to what he has to say at this point in his career. Without further ado then, here's the interview with Mr. Iwata.
Satoru Iwata from Nintendo. I am president of Nintendo and Company Limited. DS is a totally new machine, not successor to Game Boy. This is a machine to change the gaming, handheld gaming. This is a machine which will provide really revolutionary, unprecedented experiences. DS has double screen, as well known, and also we have a touch screen, one of the screen, and a combination of touch screen and double screen will change the game. And also we have dual slot. We can insert the GBA cartridge in one side, and another side we can insert DS card for new format. Everyone may surprise the change of Zelda, but we are the people to make positive surprise for you. This is the reason why we change.
The team which has already worked on the Metroid Prime 1 has been working for the development, and they know the Metroid Prime and they know the games, and they have spent so much time in order to come up with the best possible Metroid Prime game. We are very looking forward to the final completion of the Metroid Prime 2. Today we have just shown you a fraction of the gameplay, but please do look forward to the final completion of the product. Many people might have been wondering that if there would be at all the Star Fox game to be introduced to the marketing then, but yeah, please feel relaxed, because we have come to the stage we can show off what the Star Fox will look like today. Mario is shaped like paper, and thanks to the great technology of the GameCube, the paper Mario can be reproduced on the TV screens in a variety of different fashions. I really hope that you are going to enjoy the really new form of the 3D graphics generated for the GameCube. Let me talking about one more game, and that is the Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. Well, I think it was a very unusual title, since today was the very first day when we talked anything about this Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. But this game has been developed by a newly established Tokyo development team. I think it we established just last year. And it is a kind of action game, but the controlling is not going to be done by the authentic GameCube controller, but rather it is going to be done by the Konga controller, which is specifically designed for the Donkey Konga game.